The alien warrior woman challenged me, then froze when she saw the tattoo on my back. The cargo crate was heavy, but Park Junho lifted it without complaint. He had been moving boxes like this for 3 years now, ever since he arrived at Nexus 7 station. And his body had grown used to the work. The station floated in the empty space between 3 major trade routes, making it a popular stop for merchants, travelers, and those who wanted to disappear. Junho was one of those who wanted to disappear. He was 42 years old, with gray starting to show in his short black hair, and he walked with the careful steps of a man who had learned to avoid attention. His face was plain and forgettable, which suited him perfectly. He finished stacking the last crate and wiped the sweat from his forehead. His shift was over, and now he could enjoy a quiet meal at the cantina before returning to his small room. The cantina on Nexus 7 was always crowded with aliens of every shape and size. Junho found a corner table and ordered a simple bowl of noodles, keeping his eyes down as he ate. He had learned that looking at aliens too long could be seen as a challenge or an insult, depending on the species. Tonight, the cantina was louder than usual. A group of Valkyrie warriors had arrived on the station that morning, and they were celebrating something at the center of the room. The Valkyrie were tall and powerful, with blue-gray skin and muscles that looked like they were carved from stone. Their culture was built entirely around combat and honor, and they considered themselves the greatest warriors in the galaxy. Most other species simply stayed out of their way. Junho ate his noodles quietly, hoping to finish before any trouble started, but trouble found him anyway. "You there, human?" The voice was female, sharp and commanding, and it cut through the noise of the cantina like a blade. Junho looked up slowly. A young Valkyrie woman stood before his table, her arms crossed over her armored chest. She was tall, nearly 7 feet, with the traditional warrior markings painted across her face in white. Her yellow eyes burned with challenge and pride. "Yes?" Junho asked quietly. "I am Sereth of Clan Vorath," she announced loudly, making sure everyone in the cantina could hear. "And I have heard that humans consider themselves strong among the soft species of the galaxy." Junho said nothing. He simply waited. Sereth smiled coldly. "I think humans are nothing but prey animals who learn to use tools," she continued. "Weak, slow, and easily broken." The cantina had grown silent now. Everyone was watching. Other aliens leaned forward with interest, eager to see what would happen. The Valkyrie at the center table laughed and called out encouragement to Sereth. "I challenge you to ritual combat," Sereth declared, pointing one clawed finger at Junho, "to prove once and for all that humans are inferior to true warriors." Junho sighed quietly. He set down his chopsticks and looked at the young warrior with tired eyes. "I am just a cargo worker," he said calmly. "I have no interest in fighting, coward." Sereth spat the word like poison. "Your refusal only proves my point. Humans are nothing but frightened animals who run from battle." The other aliens in the cantina began to murmur. Some laughed at the human, who was too scared to fight. Others shook their heads at the pathetic display, but Junho noticed that not everyone was amused. An old Deshan merchant in the corner was watching him with narrow eyes, and something like recognition flickered across the alien's wrinkled face. "Among my people," Sereth said coldly, "refusing a challenge is the greatest dishonor. It means you admit you are worthless, and I may do with you as I please." She rested her hand on the blade at her hip. The meaning was clear. Junho was silent for a long moment. Then he stood up slowly. He was shorter than Sereth by more than a foot, and his simple worker's clothes made him look even smaller next to her gleaming armor. "If there is no other choice," he said quietly, "then I accept your challenge." Sereth grinned with satisfaction. "The arena on level 7, she said. 1 hour from now, try not to run away before then." Little human, she turned and walked back to her companions, who cheered and slapped her shoulders in celebration. The cantina slowly returned to normal. But Junho could feel eyes on him from every direction. He left his half-finished noodles on the table and walked toward the exit as he passed the old Dacian merchant. The alien grabbed his sleeve. "Human," the merchant whispered, his voice rough with age. "I have lived for 200 years and traveled to 1,000 worlds." Junho paused. "That young warrior does not know what she has done," the merchant continued, his eyes searching Junho's face. "But I can see it. The way you move, the way you hold yourself, you are not what you pretend to be." Junho gently pulled his sleeve free. "I am just a cargo worker," he repeated. The merchant shook his head slowly. "Mountains do not move," he said quietly. "But they can still crush those who challenge them." Junho's face remained blank, but something flickered in his eyes, just for a moment. Then he walked out of the cantina without another word. The merchant watched him go, then turned to his companion at the table. "That human," he whispered. "Something about him feels wrong. That young Valkyrie has made a terrible mistake." Junho walked through the station corridors. Alone, his footsteps were quiet and steady, and his face showed no emotion. But inside his mind, memories stirred, memories of fire and blood, of screaming and death, of a war that had ended 20 years ago, but never truly left him. He had come to Nexus 7 to forget. Had come here to be nobody. But the past always finds you in the end. He reached his small room and stood before the mirror slowly. He removed his shirt. His chest and arms were covered with old scars. Not the scars of accidents, but the precise marks of combat burns, blade cuts, and the strange circular wounds left by alien weapons. And on his back, covering the skin from his shoulders to his waist, was a massive tattoo, a black mountain surrounded by 7 stars, with words written beneath it in an alien language that most humans could not read. Junho looked at the tattoo in the mirror, and his eyes grew distant. "I wanted to be forgotten," he whispered to himself. He pulled on a clean shirt and walked toward the arena. Whatever happened tonight, his quiet life was about to end. The arena on level 7 was small, but well used. It had been built for exactly this purpose, settling disputes between species who valued combat over words. The floor was made of rough metal that provided good footing, and the walls were lined with protective barriers to keep the audience safe tonight. The audience was larger than usual. Word had spread quickly through the station about the challenge, and aliens of every kind had come to watch. Most of them expected entertainment. Proud Valkyrie warrior against a simple human cargo worker. The outcome seemed obvious. Aerith stood in the center of the arena, performing the traditional rituals of her people. She had removed her heavy armor and now wore only the tight fighting clothes of a Valkyrie duelist. Her muscles rippled beneath her blue-gray skin as she stretched and spun her ceremonial blade through the air. The blade was curved and beautiful, made from the black metal that only existed on the Valkyrie homeworld. It had been in her family for 6 generations. The crowd cheered as she displayed her skills, cutting the air with movements so fast that most eyes could not follow them. She was young, but she was talented. Everyone could see that. Then Junho entered the arena. He walked slowly, his hands empty, wearing nothing but simple pants and a loose shirt. The crowd fell silent for a moment, then burst into laughter. This was what they had come to see. A weak little human about to be humiliated by a true warrior. Aerith smiled coldly as she watched him approach. "I thought you might run," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I considered it," Junho admitted quietly. More laughter from the crowd. Aerith twirled her blade again. "The rules are simple," she announced. "First blood ends the match, but surrender is always an option. I suggest you take it now and save yourself the pain." Junho did not reply. Instead, he slowly removed his shirt. The arena fell silent. His body was covered with scars, dozens of them, maybe hundreds. Long cuts crossed his chest like a map of old battles. Circular burn marks dotted his shoulders. The kind left by plasma weapons. A jagged line ran from his collarbone to his stomach, as if something had tried to tear him open and nearly succeeded. These were not the marks of accidents or casual violence. These were the marks of war. Sarath's smile faded slightly. She had seen warriors before. She had grown up among them, and she knew what real combat scars looked like. This human had been in more battles than most Valkyrie twice his age. Interesting, she said, forcing confidence into her voice. It seems you have survived some fights before, but surviving and winning are different things. She raised her blade and took her stance. Junho simply stood there, his arms loose at his sides. Begin, shouted the arena master. Earth moved like lightning. She crossed the distance between them in a single heartbeat, her blade slicing toward Junho's chest. But he was not there. He had stepped to the side at the last possible moment, so smoothly that it looked almost lazy. Sarath spun and attacked again, faster this time, aiming for his throat again. He moved just enough to avoid the blade. She could feel the wind from her own weapon as it passed through empty air. The crowd grew quiet. This was not what they had expected. Sarath attacked again and again, using every technique she had learned since childhood. She was fast, she was strong, she was skilled, but nothing worked. The human did not fight back. He did not even raise his hands. He simply moved, sliding around her attacks like water flowing around stones. His face showed no emotion, no fear, no effort. He was not even breathing hard. Sarath felt something she had never felt before in combat. Doubt. Fight me, she screamed, her frustration boiling over. Stop running and fight. I'm not running, Junho said calmly. I'm waiting. Waiting for what? For you to understand. Sarath roared with anger and launched her most powerful attack, a spinning combination that her master had said could defeat any opponent. Junho moved differently this time. Instead of stepping aside, he stepped forward. His hand caught her wrist at exactly the right moment, stopping her blade in mid-swing. His other hand pressed against her elbow, and suddenly she could not move her arm at all. They stood frozen for a moment, face to face. Sarath could see his eyes clearly, now calm, steady, and terribly sad. You are young, he said quietly, so only she could hear. And you are talented, but you are not ready to take a life. And neither am I ready to give you mine. With a gentle push, he released her and stepped back. Sarath stumbled, shocked by what had just happened. No one had ever stopped her blade with bare hands. No one had ever looked at her with such calm control. The match is not over, she shouted, regaining her balance. She circled around him, looking for an opening. Then she saw it. His back was turned slightly toward her. She lunged forward, blade raised high, ready to draw first blood and claim her victory. But as she moved, she finally saw his back clearly, and she froze. The blade fell from her fingers and clattered against the metal floor. Her whole body began to shake. On his back was a tattoo, a massive black mountain surrounded by 7 white stars, with words written beneath in the old Valkyrie script, words that every child of her world learned before they could walk. Karveth, she whispered, her voice trembling with shock. The crowd murmured in confusion. They did not understand what was happening. They did not know what that symbol meant, but Sarath knew. Every Valkyrie knew. The mountain that walks, she breathed, tears suddenly filling her yellow eyes. The death deniers, the ones who saved us all. Junho turned to face her slowly. His expression had not changed, but there was something heavy in his eyes. Now the weight of memories too painful to forget. How? Sarath asked, her voice cracking. How are you here? The arena had fallen completely silent. No one understood what was happening, but everyone could feel that something important had just occurred. Sarath dropped to her knees. Her proud warrior stance was gone. replaced by the posture of someone who had just seen a ghost, and in a way, she had the man standing before her was a legend, a figure from her people's greatest tragedy and greatest salvation. He was supposed to be dead. They were all supposed to be dead. "Please," she whispered, looking up at him with tears streaming down her face. "Please tell me who you are." Junho looked at her for a long moment, then he spoke a single word, a word that changed everything: Blackstone. The word hung in the air like thunder, Blackstone, to most of the aliens watching. It meant nothing, just a strange human word with no significance. But to Sarath, and to every Valkyrie who had ever lived through the darkest days of their history, it meant everything. The crowd began to murmur in confusion. They had come to see a fight, not a warrior on her knees weeping before a scarred human. What is happening? Someone called out, "Why has the match stopped?" An older Valkyrie pushed through the crowd. He was one of Sarath's companions from the ship, a veteran warrior with gray in his mane and deep lines on his face. He had been laughing earlier, eager to watch his young friend humiliate a human, but now his face was pale. He had seen the tattoo on Junho's back, and he understood. "Everyone, be silent," he roared, his voice carrying the authority of decades of command. The crowd obeyed. The old warrior walked into the arena and stood beside. Sarath's eyes were fixed on Junho with an expression that mixed awe, grief, and something close to worship. "The symbol on this human's back," he announced to the crowd, "is the mark of the Blackstone Legion, the human soldiers who saved the Valkyrie people from extinction 20 years ago." The murmurs grew louder. Some aliens had heard stories about what happened to the Valkyrie homeworld, but few knew the details. "Let me tell you what this mark means," the old warrior continued, his voice heavy with emotion. 20 years ago, the Valkyrie homeworld faced annihilation. A species called the Devourer Swarm had emerged from the dark spaces between galaxies, billions of creatures that existed only to consume. They had no language, no culture, no mercy. They simply ate everything in their path, stripping planets down to bare rock before moving on. The Valkyrie were strong warriors, but they were not prepared for an enemy that felt no fear and could not be intimidated. The swarm came in endless waves, and for every creature the Valkyrie killed, 10 more took its place within weeks. Half the planet had fallen. The Valkyrie government sent desperate messages to the Galactic Council, begging for help, but the Council refused. They calculated the cost of fighting the swarm and decided it was too high, better to let the Valkyrie die, they said, than risk spreading the conflict to other worlds. Better to sacrifice one species than endanger many. The Valkyrie were left alone to face extinction, but then the humans came. They were not sent by their government officially. Earth was following the Council's decision to stay neutral, but 10,000 human soldiers disagreed. They called themselves the Blackstone Legion, named after a mountain on Earth that had once symbolized resistance against impossible odds. They gathered their weapons, boarded their ships, and flew to the Valkyrie homeworld without orders, without permission, and without any promise of survival. When they arrived, the Valkyrie could not believe what they were seeing. These soft, small creatures from a distant world had come to die alongside strangers. Why? The Valkyrie commander had asked the human general, "Why would you sacrifice yourselves for us when your own leaders refused to help?" The human general had smiled sadly and given an answer that became legend. "Because your children are crying," she said, "and we can hear them." The Blackstone Legion did not try to win the war. They knew that was impossible. Instead, they held the line for 3 weeks. They fought and bled and died so that the Valkyrie civilians could evacuate to safety. They stood in mountain passes and blocked tunnels with their bodies. They faced the endless swarm with nothing but courage and the determination to buy one more hour, one more day, one more chance for Valkyrie children to escape of the 10,000 humans who arrived. Only 847 survived to see the evacuation complete. The rest died on a world that was not their own. For a people they had never met when the last transport ship lifted off carrying Valkyrie refugees. The few surviving humans finally retreated. The swarm consumed what remained of the planet. But the Valkyrie people lived on. They found a new homeworld, built new cities, and started new families. But they never forgot the humans who saved them became sacred figures in Valkyrie culture. They were called Karvath, the death deniers, the ones who walked into certain death and spat in its face. The black mountain tattoo became the most honored symbol in Valkyrie history, and the words written beneath it in the old Valkyrie script were the words the human general had spoken before the final battle. Mountains do not move. The old warrior finished his story, and the arena was completely silent. Every eye was on Junho now, and the looks of amusement had been replaced by something else entirely. I was there, the old warrior said quietly, looking at Junho with tears in his eyes. I was a young soldier when the swarm came. I watched your people fight and die so that mine could live. Junho said nothing. His face was still calm, but his hands had curled into fists at his sides. I carried wounded Valkyrie on my shoulders, the old warrior continued. And when I fell, a human I did not know picked me up and carried me instead. She died 10 steps later. Still holding me, Sareth was still on her knees. Unable to stand, her whole body trembled with the weight of what she had done. She had challenged one of the Karvath to combat. She had mocked him as weak. She had insulted the memory of everyone who died to save her. People, I was a child, she whispered, her voice breaking. I was only 4 years old when the evacuation happened. I did not understand what was going on. She looked up at Junho with devastated eyes. But I remember being carried, she said. My legs were broken, and I could not walk. A human soldier picked me up and ran through the fire with me in his arms. Her tears fell freely now. I never saw his face, she continued. But I remember the tattoo on his back, a black mountain and 7 stars. I have dreamed about it my whole life. Junho's expression finally changed. Something flickered in his eyes, recognition. Memory, pain. That was you, Sareth breathed, understanding dawning on her face. You carried me, you saved my life. The arena remained silent. No one dared to speak. Junho looked at the young warrior kneeling before him, and for the first time, his calm mask cracked. I carried many children that day, he said quietly, his voice rough with old grief. I am glad you survived. The crowd dispersed slowly from the arena, but no one spoke above a whisper. The mood had changed completely from what it had been an hour ago. There was no more laughter, no more mockery of humans. There was only silence and a strange, heavy respect. Sareth finally managed to stand. Though her legs still trembled, her ceremonial blade lay forgotten on the arena floor. She could not bring herself to pick it up. The old Valkyrie warrior touched her shoulder gently. Come, he said. We should give him space. But Sareth shook her head. No, she said firmly, wiping the tears from her face. I need to speak with him. I need to understand. She looked at Junho, who had retrieved his shirt and was putting it back on slowly. Please, she said, will you talk with me? Junho was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded once. They found a small room off the main arena. Away from curious eyes, the old warrior stood guard at the door, ensuring no one would disturb them inside. Sareth sat across from Junho, still struggling to process everything that had happened. I owe you an apology, she began, her voice unsteady. What I said in the cantina, calling your people weak, calling you a coward, I am deeply ashamed. Junho shook his head slightly. You did not know, he said simply. How could you? That does not excuse my words, Sareth insisted. I was arrogant and cruel. I wanted to prove myself by defeating someone I thought was beneath me. She laughed bitterly at her own foolishness. Instead, I challenged one of the greatest heroes my people have ever known. Junho's face tightened slightly at the word hero. I am not a hero, he said. Quiet Lisserith stared at him in disbelief. You saved thousands of lives, she said. You fought against impossible odds. You came to die for strangers when no one else would help us. Yes, Junho admitted. And I watched my friends die one by one, hour by hour. For 3 weeks, I held them as they bled out and promised them that their sacrifice meant something. His voice remained calm, but his eyes were distant, lost in memories. Do you know what it is like to survive when everyone around you dies? He asked. Do you know what it is like to be the one who walks away? Sareth had no answer. After the evacuation, the survivors became famous, Junho continued. We were treated like God's people wanted to touch us, to thank us, to name their children after us. He looked down at his hands, but every time someone called me a hero, I thought of the friends who deserved that title more. Friends who died so I could live. The room was very quiet. I could not bear it anymore, Junho said. So I left. I changed my name, found work in the outer colonies, and tried to disappear. You wanted to forget, Sareth said softly. I wanted to be forgotten, Junho corrected her. I wanted to be just another worker, another face in the crowd. I did not want to carry the weight of being Karveth anymore. Sareth considered his words carefully. Among my people, she said slowly, we are taught that the Karveth are immortal spirits, beings of pure courage, who cannot truly die. She smiled sadly. We never think about what it cost them to become legends. Junho looked at her with something like gratitude. You understand, he said. I am beginning to. Sareth replied. They sat in silence for a moment. Two warriors from different worlds, sharing a burden that few others could comprehend. May I ask you something? Sareth finally said. Junho nodded. Why did you come? She asked. I know what the general said about hearing our children cry, but there must have been more to it. Junho thought about the question for a long time. I was 22 years old when we received word about the swarm, he said. I had never left Earth, never met an alien, never done anything important with my life. He paused, searching for the right words. When I saw the Council's decision to abandon your world, something inside me broke, he continued. I could not understand how anyone could look at suffering and choose to do nothing. His hands clenched unconsciously, so when the call went out for volunteers, I joined without hesitation, not because I was brave, but because I could not live with myself if I stayed behind. Sareth absorbed his words in silence. We fought not because we were heroes, Junho said, but because doing nothing felt worse than dying, because your children deserved a chance to grow up, even if we never met them. He looked directly at Sareth now. And here you are, he said, grown and strong and full of life. That is worth more than any legend. Sareth's eyes filled with tears again. But this time, they were different tears. Of understanding rather than shame. She rose from her seat and knelt before him in the traditional Valkyrianer pose, but this was not the same as her kneeling in the arena. This was not submission or shame. This was the pose of equals. The gesture one warrior gives to another who has earned their deepest respect. I will not tell anyone where you are, she promised. Your secret is safe with me. Junho looked at her kneeling form and felt something shift inside his chest. For 20 years. He had hidden from his past for 20 years. He had carried the weight of survival alone, but now, looking at this young warrior who had once been a frightened child in his arms, he realized something important. He had not failed his fallen friends. He had kept his promise to them. Their sacrifice had meaning, not in statues or songs, but but in living, breathing people like Sereth. Stand up, he said gently. You do not need to kneel to me, you never did. Sereth rose. And something had changed between them. They were no longer stranger and legend. They were no longer challenger and challenged. They were two people, connected by a moment of fire and blood 20 years ago, a moment that had shaped both their lives in ways neither had fully understood until now. What will you do now? Sereth asked. Will you leave the station? Junho considered the question. He had been ready to run again, to find another quiet corner of the galaxy where no one knew his name, but looking at Sereth, he was no longer sure that running was the answer. I do not know, he admitted. But perhaps it is time to stop hiding. Sereth smiled a genuine smile, without the pride or arrogance of before. Perhaps it is, she agreed. The next morning came slowly. Junho had not slept well. Too many memories had been stirred up. Too many faces had visited him in his dreams. He packed his few belongings into a warm bag and prepared to leave. His cargo ship was small and old, but it was reliable. It had carried him across a dozen systems over the past 3 years, and it would carry him to wherever he decided to go next. The docking bay was quiet at this early hour. Most of the station's residents were still asleep, which suited Junho perfectly. He did not want any attention, any farewells, any more conversations about who he was and what he had done. But as he approached his ship, he realized he would not get his wish. Sereth stood at the bottom of the boarding ramp, waiting for him. She was not alone. Behind her stood a dozen Valkyrie, all the warriors who had traveled with her, plus several others who must have been living on the station. They stood in a line, their postures formal and their faces sullen. Junho stopped walking for a moment. He considered turning around and finding another exit, but Sereth had already seen him, and he knew that running would not change anything. He walked forward slowly, his bag over his shoulder. I hope to leave quietly, he said when he reached her. I know, Sereth replied, but there is something that must be done first. She reached into a pouch at her belt and withdrew something wrapped in dark cloth. Carefully, reverently, she unwrapped it and held it out to him. It was a blade, curved and beautiful, made from the same black metal as her ceremonial weapon, but this blade was different. It was older, more refined, and inscribed with symbols that Junho could not read. This is a Verkith blade, Sereth explained. It is given only to those who are considered family by Clan Varth. Only 7 exist in the entire galaxy. Junho stared at the weapon in shock. I cannot accept this, he said. I am not Valkyrie. I have no right to such an honor. You have every right, Sereth said firmly. 20 years ago, you became family to all Valkyrie when you chose to die with us, rather than let us die alone. She pressed the blade into his hands. My grandmother forged this blade herself before the swarm came, she continued. She did not survive the evacuation, but her blade did, and she would want it to belong to someone worthy. Junho looked down at the weapon in his hands. The metal was warm, as if it still held the heat of the forge where it was made. The weight was perfect, balanced in a way that spoke of centuries of craftsmanship among my people, Sereth said. The Verkith blade carries a sacred meaning. It says that no matter where you go or what you do, you will always have a home with us. Her voice grew thick with emotion. You saved us once, part Junho of the Blackstone Legion, but you do not need to save us again to be welcomed among us. Junho could not speak. His throat had tightened, and words would not come. The other Valkyrie behind Sereth moved as one. They raised their right hands to their chests and bowed their heads, the highest salute in Valkyrie culture, reserved for those who had earned immortal honor. They held the pose in perfect silence. Junho stood frozen, the blade in his hands, watching these proud warriors bow to him. He thought of his fallen friends of Minjun, who had died holding a bridge so refugees could cross, of Yuna, who had carried wounded soldiers until her legs gave out, of Captain Lee, who had stayed behind to detonate the explosives that sealed the final tunnel. They should be here receiving this honor. Not him, but they were gone. And he was still alive, and perhaps that meant something after all. Perhaps surviving was not a burden to carry, but a responsibility to uphold slowly. Junho bowed in return, a deep bow of gratitude and respect. When he straightened, he saw that Sareth was crying again. But she was also smiling. "Thank you," he said, his voice rough. "I will carry this blade with honor." "I know you will," Sareth replied. She stepped aside, and the path to his ship was clear. Junho walked up the boarding ramp, then paused at the top and turned back. "Sareth," he called down. She looked up at him. "You asked me yesterday if I remembered carrying a girl with broken legs," he said. Sareth's breath caught in her throat. "I remember you," Junho said quietly. "You were so small, and you were so scared, but you did not cry, not once. Even when the fire was all around us." Tears streamed down Sareth's face. "I told you to close your eyes and think of somewhere safe," Junho continued. "And you said you were already safe because I was holding you." Sareth remembered those words. She had repeated them to herself every night for years afterward, drawing strength from them when the nightmares came. "I never forgot that," Junho said. "I never forgot you, and I am glad that you grew into the warrior you were always meant to be." He bowed once more, then disappeared into his ship. The engines hummed to life, and the cargo ship rose slowly from the docking bay floor. Sareth watched it go, her hand pressed against her heart as the ship turned toward the exit. She activated her communicator and opened a channel to her homeworld. "This is Sareth of Clan Vorith," she said, her voice steady despite her tears. "I have important news for the Council of Elders." The channel crackled, then connected. "I found one of the Karveth," she announced. "He's alive, and he has not forgotten us." There was a long pause on the other end. "The humans have not forgotten us," Sareth continued, "and we must never forget them. Spread the word to every colony, every ship, every Valkyrie who draws breath. The mountain that walks still lives among the stars." She ended the transmission and watched as Junho's ship disappeared through the station's exit port and into the vast darkness of space, alone in his ship. Junho sat in the pilot's chair and looked at the Verkith blade in his hands. Then he looked at the old photograph tucked into his console, a picture of the Blackstone Legion before the battle. When they were all young and whole and full of hope, 10,000 faces smiled back at him. "Mountains do not move," he whispered to them, repeating the words that had become their final prayer. He placed the blade carefully beside the photograph. Then he set course for the stars, carrying the memory of his friends and the gratitude of a people he had saved. Finally at peace with the legend he had tried so hard to escape, and somewhere across the galaxy, Valkyrie children learned a new verse to add to the old songs about the Karveth, verse about a human named Park Junho, who had walked among the stars as a simple cargo worker, carrying mountains on his back and mercy in his heart. The songs would be sung for generations, and the mountains would never move.